This is Keys to the Shop, episode 457, Competitions and What Makes a Good Barista, with WCE Judge Scott Conary. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio, and I'm really excited to have you along today. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to Keys to the Shop. And would you do me a favor and hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast right now? You're going to want to do that because it keeps you updated with new episodes as they come out. You get notified, and you really get enriched as a coffee professional, as an owner, a manager, a barista, doesn't matter which. You're going to find content at Keys to the Shop that's really going to help you, your career, and your business. Thank you so much for doing that. Now, also, I want to let you know about Keys to the Shop Consulting, and specifically, I work one-on-one with people through Keys to the Shop Consulting. That is custom consulting for you and your business. We dive deep into what is going on with your coffee shop, what opportunities you want to take advantage of, what things you want to fix, what things need to be refined between the operations, the people, the quality, the culture, and also just developing you as a leader in the coffee shop. That's a lot of what I do with my clients. But one of the things that we've introduced last year was the key holder coaching groups, which have been fantastic. It is transformational, peer-to-peer coaching and mentoring. I am the host and facilitator of these groups, 5 to 6 coffee shop owners who have seen success in their business and want to help each other continue to be successful. It's a mastermind group like no other in the industry, and I'm really excited about the new season, the new cohort opening up in March. And right now, at the beginning of February, we're opening up the applications to everybody who is listening to this show. We've been taking pre-applications from people, and there's a lot of interest in this. And so now is your opportunity to go and apply to be a member of this new cohort of key holder coaching groups. If you want more information, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. And you can also find an application in the show notes for this episode and pretty much every episode leading up to the new cohort of groups. So go ahead and do that. Check it out at keystotheshop.com/consulting, or you can email chris@keystotheshop.com. So click the link in the show notes to be a part of the new key holder coaching groups for coffee shop owners starting in March. Brewing delicious coffee, of course, is what we do. I mean, it's part of who we are, essentially. We are coffee people, and focusing on leveling up our quality is something that is like breathing. We're always looking for great technology to help us make better and better coffee. And in a saturated market, if you can have a little bit of an advantage over the coffee that you have in your coffee shop compared to somebody else, I think that makes a big difference. Doing it consistently, though, is really difficult, but not when you're using the ground control brewer. Go over to groundcontrol.coffee and you will see the stories, the use cases, the beautiful technology, SCA award-winning technology that gives you extraction capabilities like no other batch brewer. And it's not just a next level batch brewer. The ground control brewer makes batched iced lattes, batch cold brew, and their new brewer, the first generation was the generation, is got a 30% higher output of concentrates for batched iced lattes as well as cold brew. This opens up a lot of revenue opportunities for your coffee shop and levels up the quality. So again, if you're looking to stand out and level up and expand the capability of your coffee bar, then I think you seriously need to consider using a ground control brewer. Go ahead and visit them over at groundcontrol.coffee. The Barista Series from Pacific is the line of plant-based performance beverages that is designed for baristas and tested by baristas before it even gets sold to anybody. And because of those things, the Barista Series performs the way it should on the bar. It stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture for latte art, keeps the flavor balance focused on your coffee. Customers want that kind of attention to detail and the kind of due diligence that has gone into the design of this beverage and all of the line of their beverages is incredible. And their support for the community is matched by none. So go to pacificfoodservice.com and check them out and get samples in your shop. Try it for yourself. I think you're going to be totally impressed. So will your customers. And truly, if you're looking for the best plant-based beverage for your customers in your coffee shop, go ahead and check out the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today I'm really excited to have somebody who has played a big part in my coffee life on the show, and somebody who has been a part of the early years in coffee competitions. And I think is true for anybody who's competed in coffee at some point, has been judged by Scott Conary. It sounds a lot more ominous than it needs to, and we'll get into that in the episode with Scott. Scott is an all-around world-class coffee professional and somebody who is just consistently kind, others-focused, and it has been a fixture in the coffee industry for such a long time. As the owner of award-winning Caffe Driade, Perennial, and Eye Café in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, along with a wholesale roastery called Carrboro Coffee Roasters, Scott has had many opportunities to travel and teach and learn about coffee production, harvest selection, blends, and trends from the last 25 years. And he is an active educator in the industry in most all of the disciplines and consults with companies, restaurants, and cafes nationally and around the world. I'm always seeing Scott's travels as I tune into his socials, while also serving as the World Coffee Events representative and certified head judge for World Barista Championship since 2005. And he has been the head judge and instructor for the Alliance of Coffee Excellence and the Cup of Excellence program since 2015. Now, Scott trains baristas and coffee professionals as a consultant in the U.S. and around the world for skill, knowledge, and competition. And all of this is in the name of seeing what's possible with coffee and coffee people. So serving coffee people and pushing the industry forward. And Scott is really about that life. He just is involved in so many levels. And like I mentioned, if you've been in competition for any time, Scott has shown up and Scott has judged you directly or indirectly and assessed your routine. And he has had a window into this world for such a long time, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And it's going to be a conversation about competitions, but also the influence of the barista and the competitions downstream on the industry. And we're going to talk about what makes a good barista and how we should be approaching this concept and how the customer perceives coffee as a result of how they perceive the barista. And this world that is this elevated world of competition has shaped so much of our culture in coffee and indeed part of how people view coffee in general. So we will get deep into this with Scott because he has seen it. He's seen the ebb and the flow and has some incredible insights for us about the competition's influence, but also what makes a good barista. And for professionals all over the world, I think you're really going to want to listen to what Scott has to say. This is somebody who comes with pretty much unmatched authority on that subject. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with head judge for World Coffee Events, Scott Conary. All right, Scott, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. You know, when I have these conversations with folks, sometimes I use the word iconic, and I feel in very specific cases that it's just more fitting than in other cases. And I feel like you're one of those situations where I can't think of a competition where I haven't seen you judging. You've been my judge way back in the day. I feel like you're everyone's judge, and it's really cool to have you on this show. But you ever get people, do they tell you that?
Oh, yeah. And actually, I like it. I prefer to be considered everyone's friend, of course, but I kind of try to wrap that into there, somehow in some way. And generally it works. And I get a lot of people. There's been people in the past who have been afraid of me, and I think we got over that. But for the most part, I want people to be happy when they see me coming, right? So we get a lot of people who have appreciated the effort that not just myself, but all judges are putting into helping them hopefully get better at what they do.
And that's huge because as a former competitor of ancient days, I definitely got the sense that it's that performative part of the competition. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of nerves. But then judges debrief with competitors at the end, and often that feels very like a mentorship relationship. Over the course of many decades that you've been doing this work, along with your own businesses, I'm sure that the mentorship aspect has just kind of grown way more.
Yeah, and there's been a focus on it. I think that's kind of the important thing is there's a lot of facets in the competition that are continually changing, purposely changing. And that's a big one because it's so tied to development. This is the way everyone gets better, is if we just kept all this stuff locked in a safe, then what's the purpose? Like you get a one-off experience that 4 people got to experience and that was it. Okay. It's much better to try to develop that process and say, what can we all learn from this? And clearly there's constructs that are based on the competition. There's some things that we want to be careful about how we're doing them, but we always want to take the opportunity and any possibility to find a way to advance that individual or the competition or really just coffee at large.
Your own development in coffee has kind of tracked step by step with competition. As far as I've known you, I mean, the last memory I have of actually was at Driade, and then you had just opened a downtown location of a roasting operation at that time. So that's the last time I was like in the presence of Scott Conary.
So yeah, 2003, 2004, you're right.
Yes, 2002, 2004. But talk to us a little bit about how this particular career track, this profession now over these decades, how it got you, how you said, this is the focus of what I will do for my years.
That's funny because that is seen through your lens and it is a focus. I don't want to take that away from it, but there's a lot of the things I do in the industry and otherwise, but it is a predominant one without a doubt. And I think one of the things that struck me, and I have been more or less since the beginning, in 2001, I was in the SEAA convention, then in Miami when they hosted the Worlds. I didn't get to Monte Carlo before that one, but I got to see it there. And it just sort of rolled over me as like, wow, what is this? Like, what's going on here? What's possible from this? Like that, the idea of it really hit me. And clearly it wasn't any more fully formed than my thoughts were, but it stayed with me. And when the opportunity came up for us to have something locally, and that was the regional competitions, we were like, the Southeast was like the second after Jeff from PTs at the time had the first one in the Midwest in 2002. Like, I was like, yes, let's figure this out. What's going on? What can we do with it? This has got so many facets to it of what's possible for developmental, fun, engagement, consumer oriented, like what's possible with the format itself. And that was the most basic format you've ever seen. It was not a well-developed one, but the potential was there. And I think I saw enough of it that made me think I wanted to invest in it. And it really was, it's all volunteer. It still is to this day. And I think it's important to note that when we're talking about the development of the competitions and the people who are involved in it, that you do have to believe in it. There is a certain amount of personal gain that you get from it if you're willing to open yourself up to it. But you have to also believe in what's possible for the development that you're part of.
In that sense, you saw the possibilities and you said, this is something I want to be involved with, because at that point in your career, you had developed a certain awareness of what you had done with your businesses in coffee and what you see other people doing. What was that? Like, previous to being exposed to competitions, how had you been shaped by your own pursuit as a business owner in coffee? And what were those things that you were like, now we can go further? Where were you and where did you want to go that the competitions really resonated that way?
Yeah, that's a great overlap. I went into coffee because I loved coffee, like a lot of people, came from a completely different profession, like a lot of people at that time, and decided that it was the place where you could see your efforts have a real effect. And it really had an effect on individuals. Clearly, you can work beyond that, but having it be so immediate, and that starts with your staff or that starts with your customer, or, and you start to sort of work out from there of like, how can I make somebody's day great? Cool. That was our retail organization of, what are our goals? We want to make sure that we're pushing quality of coffee, but we also want to make sure that people are enjoying those efforts. And then as we move out from there, when you think about roasting, it's, what are the people involved in that? And that whole idea of taking on sourcing and roasting of coffee, the people involved were the primary objective. How do we engage with them and find some form of equity for them? What are we empowered to do? And how can we increase that to empower others? And so right away from the very start with the roasting was our farmer direct relationship program, which was centering the producer, which everyone's saying now, but 20 plus years ago was definitely a different thing and not considered normal. And that kind of idea of, I can invest in people and drive some kind of positive change is the overlapping theme for all of the things that I try to invest myself in, right? So the competitions were definitely along those lines. I can invest in the organization, but also how it affects the people who are involved in it. And there was some definite lags, clearly, and that's continuous. You're always going to sort of see a wave lag of who's being propelled forward faster than the others. And initially, it was very clearly the judges were lagging behind what the competitors wanted to do, even within the first 5, 6, 7 years. And we really had to get on the ball and say, we need to be at least equal, right? We need to be, as far as our ability to be part of this program. And that was where the idea of certifying judges, training judges came in. In the 5 years that I spent as competitions committee chair, that was my major goal, was to get some kind of equity and balance of effort. Previous, we would just get people who just sort of rolled in and said, I want to judge a competition. and maybe you get half a day to talk about it. If you want to evolve something, that was not going to be sustainable. That wasn't going to be something that was going to last very long.
So the end goal of having these kind of certifications is the synergy between all the participating parties, the judges and the baristas. And we talked just a second ago about mentorship and how you judge and the criteria that is being judged and the manner in which you give feedback. All of these things matter in terms of how people organize their efforts afterwards. If they say, well, next year I'm going to do better and here's how. I mean, I did that. Look at my score sheets. I said, when Barry Jarrett would tell me something about my signature drink, love that guy, earth-shattering if it was like critical or it was like an affirmation, it was something that I just took with me as a badge of honor. I guess it's really important, even outside of the competition, the barista competition, if it's direct trade relationships with farmers, it's about communication and having a standard that is a human standard to try to achieve. And I imagine that in your business, because now you're firmly involved in all aspects of the supply chain with cafes and roasteries and with competitions. I mean, that's a lot of different places to be for one person. And so I'm kind of curious how you synthesize your initial, here, I'm Scott, I'm in all of these different areas across the supply chain, and I'm setting standards. What is your beginning philosophy of how you actually apply these things that you learn in the process versus maybe where you are today after many years of sort of trial and error?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that is real easy to make that I definitely made early on is trying to apply it all. Maybe not simultaneously, but it often feels that way, is that it's not all immediately applicable. And so I guess in some regards, I'm a little bit of a sponge, you're just absorbing it all. And that's one of the great selfish parts of everything that I do is I get to keep learning. And that's a driver for me. I need to keep learning and I want to keep seeing what's possible and how we can make things better. So I'm absorbing all of that. And then what I'm hopefully learning over the decades is, when's the right time to apply this? How do we find an opportunity for the information that I've gained, and who needs it, who wants to hear it, but also who needs it, and how do we apply it? So those are really important questions that I've learned to ask myself over time, because it's not all immediate or even appropriate. It can be timing, or it can be, this just isn't something that's going to help you right now and we'll come back to it, or maybe we won't. It's careful parsing of that information, or I guess any kind of education that's gleaned.
I mean, I'm sure competitors feel the same way when they see many different expressions of how people are doing a presentation or a focus, an ingredient or what have you. They want to maybe just give the best chance of success means I'm going to apply everything that I just saw and I'm inspired by, which seems like a mistake. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah. And, it's funny because we've been doing the competitions long enough, and you definitely see that there is a trend of how information is received and how it's utilized. We're getting away from when people would just watch it on YouTube and dress like that, whoever won.
Oh, right.
which definitely happened. That's the most basic form of copying apparent success. And luckily we're way beyond that, but some version of that is going to continue to happen. You see it happening. But what I think is changing now is that there's more thought given to those things, and there's adaptation, innovation. Something about it isn't just, I'm going to do that just like they did. It's, let's see what this is. Let's see how it works with my coffee or what I'm doing. And let's see what we need to do with it to make it work or be better or whatever that happens to be.
In service of what? I mean, in saying I'm going to apply this because, but then there's this, how do we even determine the because it fits into, don't we have to have a larger goal for ourselves other than simply winning or being inspired? There's a step beyond that, right?
You nailed it. I think it's a prism, and there's a lot of different angles to it, and a lot of people have maybe a priority on one thing over another at any given time. But yes, it's a competition structure. Yes, if you're a competitive person by nature, that's going to be one of your primary things that you're focused on. But I always caution people, there is so much more there than that. And not everybody's going to be willing to hear that, or maybe they're not hearing it right away. But the idea that you're doing this because the potential for things to be better in the industry, right? This is a platform for, just the competitions are a platform for innovation, and it's a testing ground for people to try new things and new ideas. And it's also a community conversation where people are either talking about things on stage and they're being absorbed, or they're literally talking to each other in person, whether it's competitor to competitor, competitor to judge, just people in the stands. It's a little bit of an incubator for thinking in a way that you might not have done on your own. And certainly not maybe when you're strapped in your own shop and you just don't have time to get outside of that. And it's a really great place for that because it's literally designed for it. We're asking competitors to show us how good things can be. We get a lot of people who are a little upset because it doesn't necessarily look like their cafe. And I would argue that's better because your cafe already exists. And, maybe you're doing fine. But what we're asking is, what can coffee be? What's possible? And real early on, really probably around when you were still competing, is there was a need for structure. There was a need for standards, for some kind of best practice, right? Because it wasn't universal. And so that's the other thing that competitions have brought to the world is some universality, some kind of best practice standard to attain and to shoot for. And every country, every national body is a little different about where they are in their development of their coffee industry. And some are still more in need of that. But certainly by the time you're at the world level, you've gone through all of these levels of experience. And you are theoretically at a point where we're not worried whether you know what time your espresso is extracted. Like, that's not important to us anymore right now. You've already clearly shown that you know how to make it taste great. Show us now, share with us what you can create and what's new or interesting or different. It doesn't have to always be unique. It doesn't always have to be something nobody's ever seen before. But we are trying to push the envelope of what's possible, or asking the barista to do, or basically sort of saying, here, show us what's possible. We're up for it. What do you got?
Okay. And it's interesting because what happens on the stage, you mentioned the sort of domino effect that either equipment like Matt Perger and the EK43, the best example, I think, and or just, using planks of wood to serve multiple drinks. And now there's planks everywhere. It's like a pirate ship. And it's interesting the power that a stage gives to an idea that in its inception is shaky sometimes at best. It's like it could, because you're setting up the stage to say, show us what's possible. And they're like, I think this is possible. And everyone's like, that's exactly what we should do. And that's how we should spend our money. And the person who did it is just like, I don't know that I would ever do that again myself.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's buyer beware about all this stuff. I mean, the stage it's a laboratory to that point. And some people physically are making it a laboratory. But the real idea is these are just ideas. These are just some thoughts about how we can do things different, hopefully better. None of them should be taken at face value or just copied. I mean, that's up to the individual who's watching or experiencing it, whether they think that's something that should be done or not. It is easy to draw some inferences, I think, too. When you see somebody win, they're like, oh, that must have been why they won. And that's a little disconnect that we're still trying to figure out how to get around, because clearly what you see from the stands is not what you experience on stage. There's still a little bit of that. We did try to fix some of that in the U.S. Nationals at some of the earlier rounds before Nationals, where we would have some guest judges be able to sit on the panel, set them up for basics so they know what they're doing. They don't feel completely crazy, but they're, non-scoring, just have the experience, see what it's really like. And they usually walk away with like, wow, that was amazing. And I don't think I'd ever want to do that again. And I can't believe it takes so much, effort to do X, Y, or Z. And so it's a really cool, eye-opening way to get on stage and do it. Because that's the biggest disconnect that we're still faced with. Yeah, agreed. And a shout out to Chris Baca for breaking the rules for the 5th judge seat, you remember. We all kind of watched that, be like, that's not allowed. Yeah, and then it got officially written in. There's a lot of that happens. And that proves your point, though, right? Because that was, let's see what's possible, and I'm not even going to ask permission. I'm just going to do it. That's kind of the way that a lot of progress is made. And today, we've got the stage of social media that has weaponized these types of influences of what people are doing on the stage as well as in their cafes. So it could be argued in some sense that even just a cafe with a great Instagram account is equivalent in influence in some ways to a competition stage performance, depending.
I want to know from you what your perception of the barista's influence on the larger supply chain was in the time that you started to get into this competition scene, and even how you had viewed your own staff in the early days of your business operation, and then how that's evolved today and what role baristas play today in influencing what happens in the supply chain, because it feels like it plays a bigger role, but I'm curious how.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that's one of the prime examples of one of the positive aspects of the competitions and it's another one of the facets that it was trying to accomplish. Any good program has multifacets that are hopefully being moved, if not simultaneously, at least over time. And the one of them was, hey, let's put a spotlight on the barista. There's plenty of people in the industry who don't know what they do or how they do it. And that was scary, true 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And so that was an option to say, well, we can put them on stage and they can show us, right? Let's give them some guidelines, but they can show, and hopefully the other aspect of that was, and the consumer, and we're still struggling with that add-on part of it, is how do we get the consumer to be interested in the competition so that they're interested in the making of coffee as well. It happens, but it's a much slower, bigger lag than there is for the industry. In the industry, people started paying attention and they're like, oh yeah, these people are skilled and they know what they're doing, and we wouldn't have good coffee if they didn't. And how do we make sure that they can keep doing this? And as they realized that baristas had this skill set that should be acknowledged, at the very least, if not honored, they started to feel more empowered, and they would start talking about the position and what they should be expecting as that employee as opposed to any employee. And you start to see that reverberating in the industry. Specifically to your point with the competition, you start getting a feedback loop. So you start getting people who are utilizing competitions and the ability to do well or the ability to meet standards as part of their resume, and that sort of tracks with them and being able to get a job or a better job or whatever that happens to mean. And then you start seeing manufacturers of equipment listening to them. That's a good sign of power gained. And they recognize, yes, these are the professionals who are doing their job and doing it well, and we want to help them continue to do that. So when baristas were saying, we want to be able to weigh our shots when they come out, okay, a couple of years, we got a scale in the tray, all kinds of things like that I don't think anybody's listed, but you could go back and look at them, that they were results of people pushing in competitions and equipment manufacturers listening.
Yeah. Do you feel that that's just as strong today as it was then?
I honestly think it's even stronger. And I think that the equipment manufacturers are now going to the barista as opposed to waiting for the barista to come to them. And they were basically saying, what do you want to see? We'll build it. What kind of things are we missing that will help you do a better job? And sometimes it's focused on the more obvious and notable individuals in the barista competitions, but they're listening to everybody who wants to talk.
Yeah. And that's the important message, I think, there is that this competition is primarily a conversation with the focal point of the competition, which is the barista, or in other cases, it might be the roaster or the cupper, et cetera. But equipment manufacturers, I think now, of course, looking at the success of how that relationship has played out, would do well to continue to focus on that as, hey, what would the competitors think about this? And how can this serve them? Rather than just saying, well, you get what you get because it's convenient for us and we don't really care.
Or it's tradition.
Yeah, exactly.
We've always made them this way. Yeah, no, I love it because that is exactly what's happening. Even if the manufacturers aren't specifically worried about being the competition sponsor, or being the sponsored machine, they still know who their audience is. They know their audience now is a barista, and they have to design a machine the barista wants to use. And especially if the competition, the one who is the sponsored competition machine, is getting that kind of response, then everybody else is going to rush to follow.
It could be a bad response too. There's certainly equipment that I've used, whether it's on the stage of USBC or latte art, where I'm just like, never again. Well, and that's no good for the manufacturer. So because then it's like now your brand is associated with that. So it feels like a bit of a delicate balance there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's up to the individuals. Like you could have gone personally and talked to whoever it was and see if you can run that up the chain a little bit. And in the idea that you want to help them, if that's something they want to keep doing, whether they listened or not, that's a whole other conversation. But the opportunity is there. And I think that now manufacturers are listening, and even manufacturers are being created. There's industry that's being created that is specifically designed to develop tools for baristas, but also competition, and how those sort of go back and forth.
Exactly. And so that feedback loop seems like sometimes the success of a large platform like a competition stage, a world competition stage especially, is like a coffee shop or like a series of coffee locations where they say the most dangerous thing about communication is assuming that it's happened. And so like we're just going to keep doing this and people are going to love it because we are this. Like I've been a head judge for the latte art competition at Coffee Fest for many years, retiring this year. But it's easy to be like, well, we've got the momentum behind us of our reputation, et cetera, and to lose touch with that group of people that was originally the impetus for these decisions. So it feels like just like a business, you probably need to take a step back and have a little bit of skepticism toward your own success as an organization and say, we can't really take it for granted. I like Danny Meyer's quote in the Setting the Table book. He's saying about his customers, like, we're always running for office for you to elect us. Otherwise, what are we doing? So you mentioned the consumer, and the consumer, their perception of things often is quite warped by media. And I'm curious about how you've seen people's perception of coffee itself, not necessarily the barista, but coffee that the barista is showcasing. How has the competition changed the public perception of the product?
I think with like all things, it's a percentages game, and the percentage will be different depending on your locale and your culture. Because I often now am taking the world view of this, and you're always stuck with the media part. That's a tough hill to climb as far as getting change and making it in the direction that you want it to go in. It's not that it's not worth the effort. It's just that those percentages are going to be lower than maybe the industry itself. That's a big one. How much can we change the industry and sort of shift expectations, and then the consumer based on what the industry is doing. So, for example, it used to be hard to travel and find good coffee, right? And I mean, travel the world, like any other country. And now it's so much easier. And clearly it's different in every place. But the point being, it can be done. Whereas before, there were literally cities you could go into and just be like, yeah, I'm not going to find good coffee here. It's not going to happen. And that just isn't the case anymore. And a lot of that comes from that sort of wave of how people are viewing coffee, what people want to do with it based on what they're seeing. So someone who's never been to a competition but might have seen one is getting an idea of what coffee and a cool way to present it or a nice atmosphere or whatever that happens to be, and just starts to do it. Hopefully also invoking those sort of basic standards of expectations of what quality is. Those don't always go hand in hand, but eventually they either will or they won't, pretty predominantly based on whether people buy into what that person or that company is doing. And so you start to see, I think it's sort of an industry first for competitions as far as its effect, and then how people take from that and utilize it to work in their own community or their own culture. And then that starts to spread, right? Because people like it, they talk about it, they expect it. And it's that expectation that drives what everybody else does. Because if you're not doing what the expectation is, you better have a really good reason and show them why, or it's going to have to start moving in that direction. And that's what we start to see is the quality is up everywhere. The presentations are up everywhere. Just the overall interaction of enjoyment of coffee is better all over the world. And I would argue that would not have happened, certainly not as quickly as it has in a couple of decades, without the competitions and the drive for people to want to make it better.
People want to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves in a lot of ways. And being a fly on the wall or a viewer of a competition where you could today walk down the street and potentially be drinking coffee that you saw in a competition on somebody's shelf. Like you're tasting that very thing. It's not a distant thing that you can't touch yourself. Well, sometimes it is, depending on the coffees being used. At the highest levels, there's this wall of access in some cases.
There's an economic driver for sure, but I think that some of that is cultural as well, and that's based on expectations and how much and how fast you can change those to get people to want that other experience. We see that experience happening all the time in other countries that would be a hard fight here in the US to sell.
That's a good point. And so the idea that we're going to spend lots of money to go into competition and we're going to send our baristas, it seems like a mistake to think, well, I'm going to hope that we get something out of this. feels like you should probably already know what you're going to get out of it, whether you win or lose.
Agreed.
Because then you would blame the competition for not giving you your money's worth, when in fact it feels like it would be just the participation in that. There's some takeaways that I think people probably should be hoping to get and probably would get, whether they reach the pinnacle or not. And I'm curious what you think those are. What are the reasons that are the most universal and accessible returns on investment for competition?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a couple of them briefly before, but I totally agree with you. I feel like when you enter a competition, even if you're a judge, you're joining something that you should have a pretty good idea of why you're joining it. And the hope is, and I think one of the things that I think you wanted to sort of bring around is, what's a bad way to do this? And that would be if you didn't know what that was, if you weren't thinking about what's the outcome that you're hoping to get something out of this expense and time and money. But also if you only, from my perspective, if you only focus on the competitive part. And again, I think that, there's some people who are more geared that way than others. And that's different than saying that's all I want. I either want to win or that's all I'm interested in. Because the other facets that you're alluding to are information, exposure, the idea that you can learn about things that you wouldn't have learned about any other way, or certainly not easily. You're getting all kinds of access to industry, information, professionals, community. I can't even explain well with words the community that's existed that creates this amazing support worldwide. And you can see it from the smallest competitions to the largest, the support for each other, the competitors supporting each other, the way that they want each other to succeed, and that they're willing to share anything. You got broken cups, I'll give you my cups. You need help tasting that espresso? Great, I'll taste your espresso. Like, it's amazing, and nobody sees that stuff. That's all like behind the scenes, but it carries. It goes well beyond that competition, right? They stay friends. They keep talking. People that know them know each other, and they get talking. Like, it's just this amazing exchange of information and ideas, and the community support that has been created through this, friendships that have been made and carried on and carried through to businesses that have been created because of it. I don't even know if you'd be able to account for it all, honestly. And those are all opportunities, and you don't have to want all of it, right? It's just more like, what do you want? This is all here. You're walking into it, and you may be paid whatever to enter as a competitor, or you want to learn what it means to be a judge and try to support on that side. What are you hoping for? And we've seen people, even just with the community that's created, and I'm trying to find the right word. It's not access, but it is about being able to talk to people that maybe you wouldn't have talked to before. That alone, it could be a career builder, and it often is. So you're learning, you're sharing, you're interacting on levels that maybe you wouldn't have before. It's really quite an opportunity, I think, at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And it's those areas that sometimes are the bigger takeaways than actually winning. Like, most people will not win.
That's the bottom line. But we can all win. And that's what I try to tell people. There's other ways to win. Like, it doesn't have to be the first place. There is so much you can take home from these. And I'm saying that as someone who's never competed. After probably 6-7 years of judging, I was like, yeah, there's no turning around now. I think this is my track. And so instead I sort of invested in, well, how do we get the judges to be better? Let's work on that side. Let's make sure that they are equal to and able to support the competitors.
I mean, that's interesting to dive into a little bit, like the idea that this is what there's no turning back. I mean, why did that thought come up?
Partly because of time. There's only so much time, these are volunteer hours. There's only so much time you can do. And I couldn't see myself being able to continue to support the thing that I was caring about and also adding another dimension to it. Or even, I know some people just completely switch, and I wasn't prepared to do that. I didn't want to just leave the progress that we were, in the process of making, just for my own idea of wanting to try to be on that side. Now, I've fake competed a lot. I've had to do a lot of competitions on the fly in other countries when I've been the representative and there wasn't a barista on hand, and had to make up some fun scenarios. But
how'd you do?
A lot of twos on the sheet, but it doesn't matter. That's the point. That's what makes it fun. I felt like the biggest need was for people to want to support the organization of it, whether it's the competition itself or the judging pool and the judging certification, because it needed the most work. Nobody needed me to compete. It didn't help anybody. I don't even know if it would have helped me. I think it would be fun at some point to get a role reversal competition going. I talk about this a lot, but I've never done anything about it. And get a bunch of judges to compete and a bunch of competitors to judge us. That would be fun.
That would be fantastic. And it was a long time ago, in 2012 or so, Coffee Fest and myself put on a competition called America's Best Coffee House. It's like a live coffee shop competition, and it was really awesome. We did a day like that, and I was just like, it was so hard. It was way more difficult than I anticipated. Pete Licata and myself were judges, along with Ryan Soder, and we had to organize ourselves. And Pete obviously did good in his role, but I don't think as a team it was quite the show that I wanted it to be. But that's okay. You don't have to, like we say on the show, you don't have to be the best barista if you're the owner of a coffee shop. You just have to be a really good owner. So own your space, I suppose.
Yeah, right. It's a slightly different mindset for sure. One of the things that's really inspiring for me from the judge perspective is that we do get a lot of competitors now who want to come into the judging. And so they have been on the other side, and they do understand, and they're empathetic, and they understand, like, wow, I need to be supportive, and I really want to help this person, but do a good job. Like, that's how I'm going to help them. And they often will be ready to go on stage, and they'll tell me how nervous they are. And I'm like, awesome. That's perfect. Like, if you weren't nervous, there'd be a problem here. You being nervous means you care. That's the whole point of this. And the perfect scenario is really, if we're doing this right, the competitor is just sharing some coffee with us and we're just having a conversation. Like, that's what we're trying to create. It's not an us and them thing. It's you're making the coffee, but we're sharing coffee and you're telling me about it. And I'm just here for the experience. Bring it on. We achieve that, I'd say, mostly at the world level, not everyone, but mostly. And that's our goal, is to keep sort of shooting for that interaction that feels like a conversation.
Yeah, it's actually a high level. Like, at first you would say, oh, we're just having a conversation. Sounds like we're demoting the importance of it, but it actually takes a lot of preparation to do something naturally.
Thank you for qualifying that, because I am trying to make it seem like it's simple. It is not simple to get to that point. I agree.
Let me ask you this. In your time, you've seen all of these world champions. You've tasted in just incredible array of flavors and concoctions and structures of beverages, and received hospitality in that short window of time from so many different nations and cultures. So here's an oversimple question, which has a complex answer, I'm sure, which is, what now would you say is a good barista? What makes a good barista?
I like to think that as we keep evolving the competition and the score sheets, that we're trying to capture how that definition evolves, and that the original definition was a very technical one, and that still needs to happen, clearly. Like, that's a phase everyone has to go through. In order to be good at your craft, you have to be technically proficient and hopefully consistent, and all the things that we expect from our barista who is making drinks all day, every day. But there's that extra section or next level of professionalism that encompasses knowledge, but also care, like a certain compassionate care that is interested in sharing information, that is interested in connecting with people. And that connection is, for me, the difference. Like, that when you are at a point where you are really good at what you do, technically and physically, you can do it. What else is there for you? Are you interested in how that connects with another person? Or are you just putting it on the table and walking away? You don't even know who's drinking it. So I feel like the person who is the high-level barista and attain a certain level of professionalism has that passion and care and wants to make that connection.
I love that. In this conversation, I think it'd be easy for people to assume that what you're talking about in high level means competition. Are you saying that this is something that you would expect from somebody at your own store, at a store that you just visit, on your way through a city, not necessarily WBC?
Correct. And I think that that's where there's a parallel, and it can come in many forms. There's not, and again, this is kind of how we're looking at score sheets, but it's based on real world experience of, you don't have to have an entire list of information to share. I mean, that's not, I don't have any expectations that way. I'm not looking for a data sheet. I'm looking for what is exciting for you to make this for me. It could be as simple as, I just did this for you and I'm really think you're going to enjoy it. And that is enough when it's true. And it shows you that they didn't just do it, they cared to do it.
You can sense that.
I'm not going to say I'm 100% accurate, but I feel like it's apparent when the opportunity is there. And, unfortunately, a lot of our retail isn't always set up for that. And so it becomes more like, well, when can you make that connection? Can you take the opportunity, find the opportunity, make the opportunity? Like whatever it takes. And the person who is that will find that opportunity.
Technical innovation. So there's technical innovations that happen. We talked about this in terms of competition with manufacturers, but there's an equal number of innovations when it comes to the constraint of 15 minutes and the ability to connect, to put this out there a little bit further. So what do you think about the idea that maybe there's always something that's going to blow our mind at some level, machine-wise, I'm sure. But maybe are we in an era where the innovation that we have is more to do with what you're talking about, like within our constraints, figuring out ways to connect and serve?
I think that's the point, is you can put them in buckets first, right? You can say, oh, there's an innovation of equipment and anything smallwares that you want to utilize. And then there's taking the opportunity to connect. And this is very clearly on the score sheet as different things or different score sheets. It's what do you do with it? What do you do with those two buckets? How do you mix them, right? How are you utilizing what's in both those buckets? This is a horrible metaphor. I'm going to stop it now. But there's an infinite number of ways you could do this. I have seen so many ways on stage, and I'm sure I haven't even come close to how many are possible. And people can make it work at different levels, using different things with different cultures, completely different approaches. And they can still get that, I'm getting right to the heart of this. I'm showing you I care. And I'm showing you I care, not just words. I'm showing you I care with what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. And that, it's sort of a parallel to what I was asking for in a retail setting, is you're on stage, so you have to do it now. But in a retail setting, it's when can you do that? We have seen innovation help that, and innovation potentially get in the way of that. It's just up to the individual. That's kind of what I love about it, is it's sort of like throwing a whole bunch of toys on the ground and being like, okay, figure out which one works and gets your message across and connects with your customer. Because judges are customers. That's really just it. We're maybe the best customer you're ever going to get because we want to hear everything you have to say, but just a customer. We want good coffee.
I love it. That's the old saying back when I was doing it, and I'm sure people say it now, like every judge is a customer, or every customer is a judge, one way or another. So now the last thing I want to talk about here is you're not just seeing the profession of the barista shift. You're involved in a lot more than just competitions in terms of barista competitions. It's all the way up the supply chain in terms of being at origin and sourcing and tasting and judging in that capacity as well. And right now we have such an unparalleled access in some ways to information regarding the state of every link in that chain, to everything that is happening. And we want more of it. We want more transparency. But it's back to what we said before. How do you apply yourself to affect change or to process that information now that you just drank from this fire hose of guilt or urgency or whatever it is? Where do you feel is a good place for, let's just say, coffee shop owners and professionals out there? They don't have world domination plans necessarily, but they do want to make a difference. They want to be excellent, connect with their customers, be professionals, and leave a mark in some way. What encourages you these days as being a good place for people to spend their energy that has a good return on that? It makes a difference in the supply chain.
It depends on where you are in the industry and what your connections are. As far back as you can go, who do you talk to? And so if you're dealing with importers and that kind of thing, and you don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that work yourself, then you do want to vet them to the point of, what are your interactions with when you're purchasing? What are your morals when you're purchasing? And how do you bring those to the economics of buying coffee? That's always been at the forefront of my mind, and how I created a roastery and not wanting any black boxes of things that I didn't understand how they worked. But that's my personality. So it's more like I let that drive how we were going to figure out a better way of doing it, and a way that had equity, that had transparency. And so looking for those at that level, I guess you could say looking for those at any level, whether it's a retailer is getting coffee from a roaster who then has to worry about it. I try to align myself with organizations that I believe in too. Clearly, the World Coffee Events is one of them, and I was willing and am willing to put in so much time for development. I found a kindred spirit in the Alliance for Coffee Excellence, in the Cup of Excellence program, who is basically doing exactly what I was doing, but on a much bigger scale and able to affect more change and really help more people. This is a way of showing the world how great coffee is all over in all growing countries and celebrating it. I mean, I really, you can come up with a bunch of different words, but that's the biggest one, is celebrating the work that was done, the people who did it, giving them a price that allows them to keep reinvesting and expanding that into their own communities. It's unbelievable. I do that work on my own, but this way I'm able to triple it, quadruple it. It's just amazing. So those kind of organizations and that are trying to do good things are great places to go, and trying to find the ones that obviously align with whatever your capacity is. There is a couple of different gender equity programs now that are doing great work that I think are really important and really just the start, because there's so much work to be done. We'd like to try to get support for all these things.
It kind of brings us to this understanding that just like in being involved in the competitions, your return on the investment comes back to those relationships, the opportunities to win through networking in projects that don't have a trophy necessarily, but they have an impact. The relationships and collaborations and businesses that have been started on the back of conversations, and that this also is how you view progress taking place with businesses, aligning yourself, collaborating, conversations and relationships. Yeah, it just underscores that idea that we should be following at every turn, whether it's a moment in time on a stage or just the normal day-to-day business. That's really wonderful.
And I know it's asking a lot. I mean, everybody's entrenched in their day-to-day, and it can be sort of daunting to figure out, well, how do I even get involved, and what is my bandwidth for getting involved? And, the step one is just look into it, see what's possible, and find out. You might be surprised that it's just, an afternoon or whatever. And that can be enough to sort of open that door for you. And really, it becomes this amazing new world that is fulfilling in so many ways. And that way can just be, wow, it's making my business better. That's fine, but maybe you'll find other things out of it too. I know I have. I mean, friendships all over the world that never would have happened any other way. And just amazing people left and right.
And one day you'll wake up and you'll be 2 decades in judging and hey, how did this happen? Oh, that's right. Scott made me do it.
That is, I have gotten that. And then there's a few times when I told people to stop, and then they remind me that I told them to stop too. But usually I tell them to stop to do something else, something that will help other people. I won't name names, but it's every now and again, I know when it's time for people to pivot, and I try to nicely let them know.
Nice. That's pretty special.
Time to give back.
Scott, thank you so much for spending time here today. If we want to keep track of how, where you are in the world and what you're doing and up to, how can we stay in touch?
I'm not the best on social media, but I am on Instagram as Coffee Scott. That's going to be most of my international travel. If you're interested in what we do in coffee, it's just Carrboro Coffee, and that's after the town. So it's Carrboro Coffee. We sort of share all the information there is to be shared with our farmer partners and try to give them all the credit because they deserve it. Put them in the spotlight.
Nice. Again, thank you, Scott. Great to catch up with you. I really appreciate your wisdom here today.
It's great speaking with you. Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. And it gave you a little bit of insight into that world of competition. And it has been kind of a theme in some ways this last few weeks. We've been talking with champions. We've been talking with professionals who have been springboarded into their careers as a result of or helped by competitions. And in the course of these conversations, I think one of the things that happens to be a byproduct is the idea that there is a certain level of human connection that is necessary to be considered a professional, in the sense that we hold this ideal of caring. And Scott mentioned this as what makes a good barista. The idea of really caring is something that only you can render yourself, that you can source coffee and equipment to get a sponsor. And these days, competitions are incredibly expensive to participate in. And it's no small time commitment either. It's emotionally taxing, financially taxing, time draining, rewarding for the sake of, the experience and the networking. Just like we talked about, you can be involved and get a lot out of it. I have, certainly, and I've not always won. In fact, when I was competing, I got 4th place in the United States Barista Championships in 2007. And at that level, not even in the top 3, I still benefited so much just from the experience and also the relationships. And so the idea that caring is this thing that really drives what makes a good barista in the mind of somebody who has seen literally the best in competition barista work is really something that you should think about, and something that you should take away from this. Say, how am I bringing care and consideration to the equation? Mix that with what Charles Babinski was talking about relating to creating this energy and this connection with customers face to face. It's very simple, but it's actually harder to come by because you can't just purchase it. Participation in a competition doesn't guarantee that you care, but you're going to be a better professional and have a better time in the industry overall, long term, if you do care and you develop and nurture that. So your coffee will taste better, your bar will be better, your career will be better as a result of caring. And so I'm really excited to have had Scott on the show. Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing your insights with us. You can follow Coffee Scott on Instagram to stay up to date with his travels and look up his coffee shop, Eye Café, Caffe Driade, and Perennial in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and get coffee from Carrboro Coffee Roasters. You can check that out at carrborocoffee.com, and keep a lookout for Scott on the competition stage. As the competitions gear up this year, you're going to see Scott out there, and it's going to be fun to kind of find where Scott is. Kind of like a Where's Waldo for coffee. So, all right. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or anything that we put out on the show, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. If you're interested in one-on-one consulting and custom coaching for you and your business, or you're wanting to sign up for the key holder coaching groups launching again in March, go ahead and email that same email, chris@keystotheshop.com. Let's have a conversation. And with that, that's the end of our show today, everyone. I really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the show. Share these episodes and the show with your friends, with your social media. That makes a huge difference. I appreciate all of you doing that and spreading the word about this podcast. It makes a huge difference. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.